The Radon Report Manager is Radolec's successor to the venerable WinSpur, and boasts a ton of new features. Because this is a comprehensive piece of software, it requires a hefty manual, and a fair amount of practice, to acquire a firm mastery with it. Needless to say, such a mastery cannot be conveyed in the 15-minute overview that is to follow. Howsoever, this brief tutorial will teach you how to set up a new database, manage your inventory, add a customer, exploit some of the QA/QC functionality, and, last but not least, create your very own Radon test record. So, this overview will teach you the bare bones functionality of the Radon Report Manager, and provide a solid foothold in which to become familiar with it. Let's start at the very beginning, to guide you through the installation process. You may have received either a CD or a flash drive containing the Radon Report Manager. If you've received a flash drive, insert it into one of your computer's USB ports. If you have the CD instead, insert it into your optical drive. In this example, I'll be installing the Radon Report Manager from a CD, so I'll double-click on the computer icon on my desktop and navigate to my optical drive where the CD is located. After opening the CD to browse, I should notice two things: an Extras folder and a Setup executable file. The Extras folder contains a PDF of the manual in addition to this tutorial video. Let's double-click on the Setup executable file. While the setup file is preparing us for the installation, it's worth noting that your operating system will probably be set up a bit differently from the one displayed in this tutorial, but the process will be similar nevertheless. The Radon Report Manager should be compatible with Windows XP, Vista, 7 and 8 in both 32-bit and 64-bit environments. Soon, we should see a new window appear, letting us know that the Radon Report Manager is ready to begin its installation. Let's click on the Next button. After reading carefully through the End User License Agreement, click the I accept the terms in the license agreement checkbox if you agree to the terms. Now you'll need to choose an installation directory for the Radon Report Manager. By default, this will be in your Program Files directory. For this tutorial, we'll leave this at its default value. Let's click the Next button, then click the Install button that follows shortly thereafter. After a bit of time, the Radon Report Manager will have been successfully installed onto your system. You'll also notice a new icon appear on your desktop. We can launch the program by clicking on that icon, or we can navigate to the program via the Start menu. After launching the Radon Report Manager, you'll find yourself at the main menu, which will serve as your base of operations from within the software. It contains the 5 core features that you'll be using: customer data, test data, inventory, reports, and setup. Let's start out by creating our new database and click on the Setup button, which will take us into a new menu. You'll see a variety of tabs near the top of the window, which can be used to navigate throughout the setup section. We won't have the time to go over all these tabs, but let's start by entering in our new company's information. Afterward, we'll click on the Defaults button and change our default measurement protocol from single to duplicate, because we'll be doing 2 co-located detectors for our sample test later on, and then select our fictitious company's state for our default gamma values. We'll leave the test site defaults and state-specific templates alone for the time being. Now we'll click on the Text tab and add a technician named Adam Smith. We'll fill out his certificate credentials and select him to be the default go-to guy for our deployments, retrievals, and analyses. Because Adam's a quick worker, we'll set his default exposure time to 15 minutes, but we can easily change this if a specific test ends up taking longer. Now that we've finished up here, let's skip over the Letter Report Text and Reminder tabs and end up at the Pricing Info tab. Once here, we'll define our default price, terms, and service. At this point, it's worth mentioning that the vast majority of information in the setup window is to assist you in setting up your default information. And this default information is just meant to make your life easier by being the most commonly used values when creating your Radon test records, customer reports, or invoices. What this means is that you can easily change any default values you set from within the individual Radon test record itself. That means you don't need to come back here to change them. Furthermore, if you decide down the road that certain default values aren't as commonly used as you would have initially hoped, You can head back here and change the defaults to whatever you want. Now let's head to our last stop from within the setup window. By now we have entered in our company's information, added a technician to our team, changed a handful of values, and defined our default pricing information. Now would be a good time to back up our database. To do this, we click on the Database tab and then simply click on the Export Database button. A message box will appear to let us know that the database has been exported successfully, in addition to its full path name. Note that the database will always be exported to your installation directory in a subdirectory called Backups. By default, this will be in your Program Files directory under Elec. It's always a good idea to back up your database as often as possible, at least once a week, and to copy your exported database to an external storage device such as a flash drive. At this point, we've finished our cursory tour of the setup window and are ready to head back to the main menu. We can accomplish this by clicking on the X button in the top right of the Windows title bar. After setting up our company, we're ready to head into the inventory section so that we can add our reader, as well as our initial stock of a few short-term electrets. We do this by clicking on the inventory button. Just like from within the setup window, you'll notice that the inventory window has a handful of tabs near the top. But we're exactly where we want to be right now, in the Reader and Reference Electret tab. Let's click on the New Reader button, which will move the cursor down to the Reader Serial field. Because this is the reader that I'll plan on using for the majority of my test records, I'll be sure to select the default checkbox as well. The rest of these fields are pretty self-explanatory, so I'll just fill them out quickly to save a bit of time. After we're finished, let's take a quick weekly reference electret reading. By default, the Radon Report Manager is set to yell at us if we fail to make our recommended weekly reference readings on time. If you so desire, this feature can be disabled from within the Reminders tab in the Setup window. Now that we've added our reader into the database, let's head over to the Electret Inventory tab in order to add a couple short-term electrets that we'll be using for our sample test here in a few minutes. There isn't much to this. We simply enter in the electret serial number, select whether it's short-term or long-term, enter the date when we added it into our inventory, and then key in its initial voltage. And voila, we're done. You may have noticed that there are two other tabs, the CRM Inventory and Miscellaneous Inventory tabs, in this window, but it's beyond the scope of this overview to delve into them. Suffice it to say that their behaviors are quite similar to the electret inventory, and will allow you to add other detectors, such as CRMs, activated charcoal, or liquid scintillation, into your database. Now that we've finished here, let's close the inventory window by clicking on the X in the top right of the title bar, which will return us to the main menu. Our third step will involve adding a customer into our database. Although there are a few different ways to do this, we'll do it the proper old-fashioned way. By clicking on the Customer Data button, we'll be transported to a new window where we can add a new customer. In the interest of brevity, I'll fill this form out quickly. It's pretty self-explanatory. But while I'm doing that, it's worth noting that you don't need to click on the New button unless you already have a current customer selected and then you wish to add a new one to your database. You can also use this window to search for all Radon tests associated with a specific customer, which can come in pretty handy when you're trying to track down a specific record. Now that we've finished up here, we can click on the Save and Close button to return us to the main menu. By this point, we have accomplished 3 different tasks. First, we've taken a tour of the setup window and defined our company's information, in addition to a technician. Secondly, we headed over to the inventory window and added in our reader, as well as a few electrets. And then thirdly, we added a new customer to our database. Now, at long last, we're ready to create our very own first Radon test record. We'll do this by clicking on the Test Data button from the main menu. After doing this, the Test Assistant will pop up, asking us what it is that we want to do. Although we can search for existing records from here, we're interested in making a new one with the customer, Joe Somebody, that we just created. So, let's click on the New Record with Existing Customer button. Let's select Joe Somebody from the drop-down list that appears, and then, because we'll be doing the test at his house, let's click on the same button for the test location. You'll notice that our required information has defaulted to the values that we changed from within the setup window. Our default reader has also been selected for us. Now that we're ready to begin the test, Let's start off by changing the mode from manual to initial. While this isn't necessary, it will assist us in tabbing through to only the fields that we'll need for our initial deployment, namely the Electret serial number, box number, because it's a duplicate measurement, and our initial voltages. Now, before we head off to deploy the detectors, let's print out a deployment sheet to take with us. This is done by making sure the appropriate printer is displayed, and then selecting the report type. In this case, it will be the deployment sheet. Then we just click on the print button. If we want, we can also click on the preview button to see what the deployment sheet would look like, or we could export it directly to a PDF by clicking on the PDF button. Similar to exporting a database, the newly created PDF will be stored in the installation directory of the Radon Report Manager, although in a subdirectory called PDFs, not backups. Lastly, let's click on the Save button to ensure that our current record is properly saved. After we've done this, we're ready to head off to do our simulated test. After retrieving our detectors, we're ready to track down our existing record that we made a few days ago and enter in our final voltages, in addition to our deployment information. After clicking on the Test Data button, the Test Assistant will load. This time, though, we'd like to search for an existing record, so let's look up the record by one of the Electrets that we just retrieved. After selecting SAA001, it will load up our test record so that we can conclude it and generate our results. First off, let's click though on the Deployment Info tab and fill out our deployment information. Most of this information is fairly self-explanatory, so I'll do this quickly. After we've finished here, let's head back over to the General Info tab to enter in our dates and times. We can do this either manually via the keyboard or by using the Date and Time selector. After we've entered in our final voltages, you'll notice that the radon concentration appears, as well as the average concentration and relative percent differences because we're doing a duplicate. Let's double check our pricing info before we print out any reports. You'll notice that it defaults to the values that we defined in the setup window. We could change them if we wanted to, but let's say that we're happy with this as it stands. Now let's print out a lab report for our records, as well as a test letter and invoice for our customer. We do this almost the same way that we printed out the deployment sheet earlier. The only difference is choosing the appropriate report types in the drop-down box. And that's about it. We have created and completed our very first radon test record with the Radon Report Manager. Let's exit out of the test data window and return to the main menu. With only a bit of time remaining, let's press the Reports button and take a quick peek at some of the various reports that can be created by this software. As we're perusing through the various reports, it would be remiss to say that this has been a comprehensive tutorial of how to use the Radon Report Manager, because it hasn't been. However, this overview should have provided you with the bare minimum framework to get started using this software. After all, if the entire scope of this program could be thoroughly explained in 15 minutes, we wouldn't need a 100+ page manual for the thing. The best advice I can offer is to dive into the program and explore it, getting a healthy dose of trial and error in the process. And while you're at it, don't forget to back up your database as often as is humanly possible. While we're happy to help you with whatever problems or questions you might have while using this software, we can't resurrect a dead hard drive. Lastly, as a final thought, we're constantly trying to improve our software, so let Elec know what you think. A huge number of features and improvements have come from our end users, and we really are trying to create a software package that is both intuitive and easy to use, as well as being tailor-fitted to your company's specific needs.